Chosen one. The truth is arriving with the full force of a reckoning they hoped you would never witness. What you endured was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a cold, engineered act of war designed to cause catastrophic damage at your most vulnerable moment. The realization is hitting the atmosphere now. You took it like a god. This monstrous betrayal made everyone sick. The very scheme intended to dismantle your name has backfired, leaving your character untarnished while the world reels from the ugliness of their failed plot. Every great conflict has an opponent who believed they were scripting the outcome. This one is no different. Before unpacking what was done, consider what they believed going in. They ran their calculations. They filed your kindness under weakness. They filed your patience under passivity. They filed your silence under surrender, and that filing was the most expensive mistake of their lives. In their minds, you were manageable. You were someone they could maneuver. They believed that under the right combination of sustained pressure and public humiliation, you would fold neatly and disappear. They expected a clean finish, a quiet dissolution where you stepped out, and they stepped into whatever vacuum you left behind. They had a playbook, and the playbook had never failed them before, so the construction began, quietly, carefully, with the kind of patience most people reserve for things they genuinely love. Every layer was placed with deliberate method, every move was calculated. The coldness of it, when finally exposed, made grown adults struggle to articulate what they had witnessed. What they did not put in their calculations was this: you had already been through fire, real fire, the kind of trial and loss and betrayal that would have reduced the people coming for you to ash in a single afternoon. What they were preparing to deliver to you was not new territory. You had walked through darker places than anything they were building, and you had done it before they ever learned your name. They thought they were setting a trap. They were walking into one they had built for themselves. Here is the detail that matters most. You were not chosen by accident. Chosen ones do not attract random enemies. The level of premeditation, coordination, and patience directed at you does not get invested in someone considered insignificant. Your light made someone else's darkness visible to themselves. Your momentum made someone else's stagnation impossible to ignore. Your very existence became a daily reminder of everything they refused to build within themselves. So the decision was made not to grow, to extinguish you instead. That is not the behavior of someone who is winning. That is the behavior of someone who is terrified. The scale of what was built against you was an involuntary confession about the scale of your threat. They told on themselves the moment they decided you were worth that much of their energy. Let that anchor you. What was done to you was monstrous, and in the most twisted way possible, it was also a tribute to who you are. Nobody anticipated the collateral damage, and that collateral damage did not land on you. You were built for this, and that case will be made fully. The fallout landed everywhere else, because this betrayal did not just wound one person, it cracked an entire community's understanding of what is possible between human beings. Before this went down, the people around you were operating on quiet assumptions. Loyalty was real. Closeness created safety. The people who stood in your corner and used the language of allegiance were, in fact, allied with you. These were not naive beliefs. They were reasonable conclusions built from real observed behavior over real time. And the betrayal, in its precision and its coldness, demolished every one of those assumptions publicly. The sickness people felt was not just about cruelty, it was about calculation. Impulsive betrayal can be explained away. Emotions ran high. Things got out of hand. It was a moment of weakness. But engineered betrayal, patient studied, deliberate betrayal, that forces a completely different reckoning. It forces people to confront a truth most of them spend their entire lives successfully avoiding. Evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it memorizes your preferences. Sometimes it applauds your wins while quietly cataloguing your vulnerabilities. Sometimes it performs closeness so convincingly that no one can tell the difference until the mask comes off completely. After witnessing what happened to you, People went back to their own lives and quietly audited everything, every alliance, every promise, every person who had claimed to be in their corner. You became, without asking for the role, living proof of something people had hoped they would never have to believe, that no bond is automatically immune to this kind of violation. And then you did something no one saw coming. While the shock and the grief and the outrage were still moving through everyone around you, you stayed steady. You did not collapse. You did not explode. You did not perform grief for an audience or launch a desperate campaign to defend yourself. You were just steady, calm, present, like someone watching an amateur attempt a trick they had already seen fail from behind the curtain long before the performance began. That steadiness cracked something open. When people realized you were not going to fold, the initial reaction was not just relief. It was closer to awe, and underneath the awe, discomfort. Watching you hold your ground under that weight forced a question that cut much deeper than sympathy. It forced people to look at themselves honestly and ask, if this had happened to me, would I have kept my integrity intact, or would I have dropped it to protect myself? Your response to what was engineered against you became, without your permission, a standard, a measurement, and most people quietly discovered they were not sure they could meet it. You did not just survive publicly, you elevated the entire conversation about what surviving with honor actually looks like. The people who built the trap had to stand there and watch that happen. They wanted public shame directed at you. What they got was public awe. That was not what they paid for. If you felt the truth in these words, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can see it. Most observers assumed the attack was about opportunity, competition or territory, and while those things may have been part of the surface motivation, the actual target was something far more specific. The target was your mind. The target was not your position and not your reputation. The actual goal was to destroy the internal architecture that makes you recognize yourself. They wanted to create enough sustained psychological pressure, enough public humiliation, enough manufactured isolation, enough coordinated chaos to fracture your sense of self completely. Their endgame was not your failure, it was your dissolution. They wanted to produce a version of you that even you no longer trusted. Once that happened, the plan would have been clean. They could have painted you as unstable, erratic, someone who fell apart under pressure, and every whispered lie they had been circulating quietly would have found its confirmation. The cruelest part of this trap is that if you had broken the way it was designed to make you break, you would have been too far gone to defend yourself. You would have become living proof of a fiction someone else wrote about you. This trap required your cooperation. Every move was designed to push you toward one specific reaction: the explosion, the visible meltdown, the desperate counterattack that could be reframed as instability. They needed you to perform the character they had been painting in private. You refused. You refused the way the truly powerful always refuse, by declining to perform a role someone else assigned you. You held your ground when holding it cost more than most people will ever be asked to pay. You endured in silence when lashing out would have been so much easier, so much more immediately satisfying, and so much more understandable to everyone watching. That refusal did something they had no backup plan for. It starved the entire operation of oxygen. Without your emotional reaction to feed on, the narrative had nothing to sustain it. The people paying close attention began turning their gaze away from you and toward the inconsistencies accumulating on the other side. Your composure became the first crack in their facade, and once a facade begins cracking, it does not stop. What nobody names directly is what it actually costs to hold ground the way you held it. You were not numb, you were not disconnected, you felt every piece of it. The humiliation of watching something intimate get weaponized publicly, the grief of seeing people you trusted choose the wrong side, the exhaustion of maintaining composure when every instinct was screaming at you to defend yourself. You carried all of that without the release of an outburst, without the temporary relief of fighting back openly. You chose the harder path because somewhere deeper than conscious thought, you understood that the reaction being demanded of you would cost you more than the silence ever could. That kind of sustained, costly, deliberate composure holds up a mirror to everyone who witnesses it. It asks without asking, what would you have done? Most people, answering honestly, do not love what they find. That is a specific kind of power that only chosen ones carry. The power to transform personal suffering into a question that outlasts the moment. You've probably noticed, a lot of chosen one channels on YouTube have stopped publishing, videos pulled, voices silenced. The mainstream media is cracking down on us, but we will not give up our voice. That's exactly why I'm putting you onto something real, Destiny Engine. I built this because I was done watching chosen ones get dragged through betrayal, isolation, and attacks while their enemies strutted around unchecked. I want to help you accelerate the speed of your divine justice and step fully into your purpose. And the beauty of it, you don't even have to lift a finger. Destiny Engine takes their downfall and flips it into your rise. This isn't another meditation app. It's declassified consciousness technology, the same mind programming tools your enemies once used to install fear, competition and scarcity, re-engineered to restore your sovereignty and align you with the cooperative, upgraded operating framework. It generates personalized sequences mapped to your divine purpose. The hardest thing you'll do is put on headphones, press play, and watch your enemies keep digging their own grave. Join Destiny Engine to support your favorite channels and use it for your own rise. It's a 360 win. Start your Destiny Engine for $7 today and turn everything they did to break you into fuel for your rise. Link in the description. There is one mistake at the center of everything, the one that made all the other failures inevitable. They chose wrong. Every piece of their preparation was executed with precision. The research was done, the case was built, the moment was selected carefully, and inside all of that methodical work, one catastrophic error was made. They completely underestimated the foundation they were attacking. What was visible on the surface gave no indication of the depth underneath. Your endurance was missing from their calculations because it does not make sense in the world people like them inhabit. They operate from fear, fear of exposure, fear of being outshone, fear of someone else's light making their own darkness visible. And because they operate from fear, they assumed you did too. They expected a predictable outcome from a predictable level of pressure. What they did not model was someone who had already survived the kind of loss and betrayal and trial that would have destroyed them on contact. The version of you that arrived at this conflict had already walked through darker circumstances than anything they were preparing. What they delivered to you was not new information. It was a familiar landscape, one you had already navigated before they ever entered the picture. Operating on a higher frequency means experiencing attacks differently. You do not take every blow as a reason to quit. You have developed the ability to absorb something that would flatten someone else and extract the information from it, understanding exactly what is at stake, understanding exactly who is afraid and why. You built that ability through experience, not talent. You paid for it. Every time the pressure was applied and you did not fall, your attackers revealed something they had not anticipated, their own fragility. Each failed attempt to break you exposed how desperately they needed you to break in order to validate the internal narrative they had been telling themselves about who they were versus who you are. Your refusal to collapse was not just an inconvenience to them, it was existentially threatening. It meant their model was wrong. It meant they had fundamentally misread who they were dealing with. And people who have staked everything on a single outcome cannot absorb that kind of failure quietly. The more pressure they applied, the more they exposed themselves. The more desperate the escalation became, the more clearly everyone watching could read what was actually happening. Not a powerful force executing a strategy, but a frightened one, swinging at someone who simply would not fall. They lit the fire to consume you. It refined you instead. Every detail of what they constructed was calibrated for maximum damage. Every whisper was seeded into precisely the right conversation. Every piece of performed concern was delivered to exactly the right audience. They maintained a safe distance, appearing reluctant, maybe even sorrowful, about the truth being revealed, while the whole apparatus went to work on your name. In their calculation, it was already over. The damage would stick. The version of events they had distributed would become the permanent record. You would spend the rest of your days defending yourself against a narrative too widely dispersed to ever fully correct. And then you stayed composed. You stayed genuinely, authentically, devastatingly composed, not the forced stillness of someone white-knuckling through humiliation. You did not spiral into frantic explanations. You did not launch emotional counterattacks. You did not tear anyone down in an attempt to save yourself. You moved through the chaos like someone who already knew how this concluded, someone who was simply not threatened by the particular chapter currently unfolding. That composure did something no public response could have achieved. It created a fracture in the narrative being told about you. A guilty person performs in a specific way under that kind of pressure, and when you refused to perform, attention shifted. Observers began watching the accusers instead. Inconsistencies began to accumulate and become visible to anyone paying close attention. The involuntary satisfaction that flickered across certain faces at exactly the wrong moments. The accounts that kept shifting in small but telling ways. The unmistakable difference between someone who is genuinely hurt and someone who is performing being hurt. What had been designed as a public verdict against your character became an examination of theirs. When people saw the full architecture of the deception, the patience, the precision, the evident enjoyment of the destruction, the conversation stopped being about you entirely. It became a detailed, documented study of what a person is capable of when jealousy and malice are left completely unchecked. The shame that was packaged specifically for you never found a recipient. You refused to sign for it. Without a host, it had nowhere to travel except back to its origin, and that is exactly where it landed. The scandal is still discussed, but not as a verdict on your character. It is discussed as a verdict on theirs. Their willingness to use other people as instruments in a campaign against someone who had done nothing to deserve it left a mark on everyone who participated. Every person who nodded along, who stayed silent when speaking, would have cost them something. Those people now carry a weight that does not lift easily. That weight is not yours to carry. You held your integrity when it cost the most. They spent theirs trying to spend yours. Most people believe strength is loud. Most people believe winning requires noise, arguments settled publicly, enemies reduced visibly, scores posted for everyone to see. Most people have never encountered the specific, devastating force of someone who simply refuses to give an opponent the reaction needed to sustain an attack. You gave them nothing. You withheld your reaction, not from weakness, not from fear, and not from having nothing to say. You withheld it because you understood something that separated you from every other participant in that conflict. Not every battle is won by engaging. Some battles are ended by letting the other side exhaust every resource they brought while you remain unchanged, unbroken and unmoved. There is a quality of stillness that is not passivity. It is predatory in its patience. It belongs to someone who already knows the other person has nothing left once they burn through what they came with. It belongs to someone who has decided, clearly and permanently, that the chaos in front of them does not carry enough weight to deserve a response. Your silence was not the silence of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone who understood that saying nothing was the most powerful available statement. Every time you declined to react, every time the expected explosion did not arrive, every time the demanded meltdown failed to materialize, the full, unshared weight of what had been done was pushed back onto the people who did it. There was no distraction. There was no counter-narrative to redirect attention behind. There was no drama from your end to hide behind. There was only the unrelenting presence of your composure, and everything it exposed by contrast. The silence that was meant to make you look complicit became the precise instrument that made the truth legible to everyone paying attention. You did not just survive the pressure, you used it to expose the source of it. When everything came down, the loss felt enormous. It was not just the relationship, not just the opportunity or the reputation, but something deeper. It was the framework, the quiet set of operating beliefs about how people work and what closeness means. Loyalty had weight. Trust built over real time created a kind of protection. The people who had stood alongside you through genuine circumstances had earned their proximity. That framework is gone, and it is not coming back. Here is the thing that rarely gets said directly. It was already obsolete. It was built from genuine experience and real generosity, but it was built for a version of the world that cannot accommodate the level you are moving toward. The discernment you are carrying now, the ability to sense the shift in someone before they show their hand, to read what is underneath what is being performed, to protect what matters without announcing that you are protecting it, that cannot be downloaded. It can only be earned exactly the way you just earned it, through fire, through betrayal that cost you something real, through the kind of loss that permanently recalibrates your perception. The loss of those illusions was not simply a wound. It was an upgrade delivered in the worst possible packaging. There is a specific grief that lives inside this revelation, one that gets bypassed in conversations about strength and survival. It is the grief of having genuinely cared, not about the performance of the connection, but about the actual thing. The moments that felt real before you had the full information to understand how much of the connection was infrastructure for what was coming. You invested real care, you gave real presence, you extended real pieces of yourself in what you believed was a genuine exchange. That grief is valid. Carrying power does not mean pretending the loss was small. Taking it like a god does not mean feeling nothing. It means refusing to let the grief become your destination. It means allowing yourself to mourn the person you believed someone was, and then releasing that mourning before it calcifies into something that poisons everything ahead of you. You are allowed to feel it. You are not allowed to let it make your decisions going forward. Your power lives not in never being wounded, but in never handing the wound that controls. What was taken from you was real. What you are building from here is more real. The version of you standing on the other side of this clear-eyed, discerning, grounded in a self-knowledge that cannot be purchased or rushed, that version is precisely the one your enemies were most afraid of. They believed they were removing you from the equation. They were completing you. Now we arrive at the move that most observers completely misread, the one that looked like softness, and was in fact the most strategically decisive thing you could have done. You forgave. You forgave, not because it was deserved, because it was not, and pretending otherwise is dishonest. You forgave, not because what was done was anything less than monstrous, because everyone with clear vision knows exactly what it was. You forgave, because you understand something about power that people who operate the way your enemies operate will never grasp. Carrying hatred forward is not free. Replaying the details, sustaining the wound to justify the grudge, plotting retaliation, all of that costs something real. It costs your attention, it costs your energy, it costs your forward momentum, and every day you remain in that space, influence is still being held over you, different in form than before, but influence nonetheless. Forgiveness was not a gift to anyone who harmed you. It was a severance, a clean, surgical, permanent cut from everything that was still connecting you to their control. You reclaimed the part of your mind they were still occupying. You redirected the energy that had been feeding the wound entirely toward the mission that the betrayal was designed to interrupt. That move broke something in the people who had been positioning themselves for the counterattack. They had readied a second campaign. They were expecting a version of you to come back loud, bitter, and giving them material to point at. Instead, you stepped out of the conflict entirely, They were left in full battle stance with no opponent, swinging at empty air, and looking to everyone watching like exactly what they were, people who could not release someone who had already fully released them. Your forward movement without looking back made one contrast impossible to ignore. Every additional day you built and grew, the distance between your trajectory and where they remained stuck became more visible and more damning. You proved that the most devastating response to a monstrous betrayal is a life that does not require the person who betrayed you to suffer in order to flourish. That lesson, the one you demonstrated without trying to teach it, is one that people carry into their own lives, long after the details of what happened to you have faded from the conversation. Here is the truth about your enemies that they will never say aloud. Long before any action was taken, you were already consuming significant space in their thoughts. It was not out of admiration in any healthy sense, though some distorted version of that was almost certainly present. What was really happening was constant measurement. Your presence in any space changed the energy of that space. Your name preceded you in ways theirs did not. The people whose attention and respect carried real weight were responding to you differently than they were responding to them, and that awareness, persistent, daily, impossible to silence, was the engine that drove everything that followed. What accumulated was not a single dramatic decision. It was a slow build of resentment, dressed up as principle, as concern, as something that felt justified from the inside. A justification was constructed and maintained carefully, but underneath that justification was something far simpler and far more honest. Watching you succeed was unbearable, and admitting that was something they were unwilling to do. Here is the irony that lives at the center of all of it. You already knew, maybe not the full dimensions, maybe not the exact shape of what was being built, but you felt the shift before it was visible. You noticed the complements that carried a hidden edge. You registered the presence that appeared reliably when things went wrong and disappeared with equal reliability when things went well. Something underneath their performance did not match what was being presented, and you sensed it quietly, without announcing it, watching the whole thing unfold. By the time the move was finally made, you were not surprised. They wanted to deliver an earthquake. What they delivered was a storm you had already been watching build from a distance, and you had already constructed your shelter before it arrived. The grand reveal they had spent so long preparing was not a masterstroke from your vantage point. It was confirmation of what you had already concluded. It robbed the entire operation of its power over you in that instant. You did not expose yourself. You extended the illusion that things were proceeding on schedule while you were already multiple steps ahead. And the entire time they were assembling the trap, they were the ones walking into it. Now that the full truth is visible, now that the mask is permanently off, and what was underneath it can be seen by anyone paying attention, you hold something that cannot be reclaimed by anyone who harmed you. You hold the documented, witnessed truth of what they were willing to do, how far they were willing to go, and what that reveals about who they actually are beneath the performance they maintained. That knowledge does not diminish with distance. It becomes more significant as the gap widens between where you are going and where they remain. They spent every resource trying to define you to the world. What they accomplished was defining themselves permanently without your participation. The weapon was always pointing in the wrong direction, and they were the ones holding it. Now we name what is operating underneath everything else. This is the explanation for why consequences unfolded without your involvement, why certain doors closed on your enemies at the exact moment they expected those doors to open, why alliances they had counted on quietly dissolved, why the unraveling carried its own momentum completely separate from anything you did or did not do. Your path is not accidental. The particular combination of strength, grace, resilience, and refusal that you carry was not self-assembled from ambition. It is assigned. You are moving along a road that was marked before this specific conflict ever entered your life. And when someone moves against a marked life, with the kind of deliberate, sustained malice that was directed at you, they are not simply quarreling with a person. They step into a category of conflict that no human strategy can navigate successfully. The same hands they used to try to dismantle you unknowingly activated the mechanism of their own consequences. When someone interferes with a divine assignment, the fallout is not simply manageable. Something is set in motion that cannot be stopped, redirected, or survived intact. The forces that protected you operated at a level your enemies had no access to and no awareness of. You did not have to engineer any of what unfolded. You did not have to plan it, execute it, or even consciously anticipate it. Your only requirement in the aftermath was to keep moving, keep building, keep showing up as the full version of what you were sent here to be. The rest resolved at the level it was always going to resolve at, above the jurisdiction of human scheming. Your survival is not a lucky result. It is documented evidence of what happens when someone attacks a life fortified by something beyond their reach. They brought everything they had to this fight, and it was not enough. Not because you outmaneuvered anyone, but because you were never operating alone. Here is the reality they cannot outrun. No matter how thoroughly they attempt to rewrite events in their own minds, you are still here. You are not just surviving. You are not just intact. You are here, moving, building, becoming. Every accomplishment, every connection, every door that opens, every atmosphere that shifts when you enter it, each one is additional testimony in a case that was already decided. You are the living evidence that cannot be destroyed. You are the reference point that cannot be redacted. Your presence is already the confrontation. No speech is required. No public reckoning. No formal accountability process. Every time your name is spoken in spaces where your enemies are present, every time word of something you have built, someone you have helped, or any version of you flourishing reaches them, something shifts inside them that cannot be quieted. It is a recognition. It is an involuntary confrontation with the gap between what they intended to produce and what they actually produced. What they intended was your ending. What they produced was your elevation. What they intended was your humiliation. What they produced was your testimony. What they intended was your replacement. What they discovered is that you are not replaceable, not because you clung to any position, but because what you created and sustained in every space you occupied was not transferable to anyone else. The atmosphere shifted when you were no longer present. People who had taken for granted what your presence produced began to feel the absence in ways they could not immediately name. And the conversation that was supposed to center on your failures gradually became a conversation about the failures of those who pushed you out. You do not need to say a single word. Every day you show up as the full, undiminished version of who you are is another piece of evidence, another line of testimony in a case that keeps writing itself without your assistance. Survival is the floor, not the ceiling. You were not built to simply outlast what was done to you. You were built to move so far beyond it that the betrayal eventually becomes the smallest, most irrelevant detail in a life too large for anyone to reduce to a single painful chapter. What happens from here is entirely about you, about the mission that existed before any of this, and that continues long after the people who tried to derail it have become footnotes. About the people who are waiting for what you carry, your specific presence, your specific wisdom, the particular version of hard-won clarity that only you can deliver because only you paid the price for it. You are the proof that there are people in this world who cannot be reduced, people who cannot be rewritten by someone else's cruelty, people who cannot be buried by someone else's agenda, no matter how precisely that agenda is built. People who walk through fire engineered specifically for their destruction and come out the other side, not just intact but refined, sharper, clearer, and more fully aligned with what they were always designed to become. Taking it like a god does not mean you felt nothing. It does not mean you floated above the impact untouched. It means you absorbed the full force of what arrived, felt it, processed it, let it move through you entirely, and you did not let it change the direction of your life. You did not let it rename you. You did not surrender your identity to the people who were working to redefine it. That is not the default human response. Most people, when hit with the volume and precision and sustained force of what was aimed at you, do one of two things. They collapse inward and become a smaller, more closed, more defended version of themselves, or they explode outward and become louder, more combative, and more destructive. Both responses are understandable, both are entirely human, and both would have delivered to your enemies exactly what they needed to finish the job. You did neither. You held the full shape of who you are under conditions engineered specifically to distort it. You maintained your direction when every force being applied was designed to throw you off course. You did all of this across a sustained period that wore down everyone who merely witnessed it, which means the actual weight of what you were carrying is something only you will ever fully know. The betrayal designed as your burial was actually your planting. Everything they poured on top of you, every accusation, every coordinated attempt to suffocate your name, your influence, your momentum, became soil. Chosen ones do not simply survive in soil, they grow. They root deeper than anyone watching could have predicted. They rise through every layer of what was meant to suppress them and emerge more powerful, more dangerous to every lie that tried to define them, and more formidable in every space they occupy going forward. The lie they told about you carries an expiration date. It is already rotting. The truth about you carries no expiration date at all. It compounds, it grows. It gets confirmed with every additional day you operate at the level you were built to operate at. No campaign, no coordinated effort, no alliance of small-minded people with large ambitions can stop a truth that is still actively being written. What they accidentally built by coming for you was your origin moment, the pivot point, that when people look back at everything you eventually accomplish, they will identify as the moment everything became undeniable, the moment the opposition revealed the depth of your foundation, the moment the pressure proved what you were made of. You lived that moment. You did not go over the edge. You came back from it, more complete than you were before it arrived. They thought they were writing your ending. They wrote your beginning. You did not just outlast them, you outshone them. And that light is not going out. Not now, not ever, because you were built specifically for this, and they were never in any version of this built for you.